Hello and welcome everyone to the Wall Street Blockchain Alliance's Crypto Roundup for Friday, April 12th, 2024. Ron Quaranta here with my dear friend and co-host, the one, the only David Brill. Joshua Klayman may be joining us. I think the Gulf Stream is in transit. David, thank you all for being here on LinkedIn and on X live streaming. If you've got questions for David or I, please put them in the chat. Before we begin, our usual disclaimers, please keep in mind that nothing discussed is accounting, investment, legal, or tax advice. And that obviously all of the tokens and things that David and I are talking about, those are not endorsements of any of the tokens whatsoever. These are our opinions only. So David, good to see you, old friend. It's been yet another busy week. Macroeconomic data, CPI, what else are we talking about here? The Uniswap case. What are you seeing in the market? Let's start with the macro, David, if we could, because I know it's a point for you and I, and for the audience, poor David gets text messages back and forth from me almost every night of the week. CPI data came out recently, David, that pointed to stronger inflation than anyone anticipated, which means there's not going to be interest rate cuts, at least anytime soon. The June cut is off the table, apparently. And it really is a focus on alternative assets. And is it a risk-off trade? What did you make out of the CPI number?
Well, look, I don't think it's a shock to people that inflation is still around, whether you're going to the supermarket or other places, and oil is creeping back up again. So I don't think on a fundamental level people should be surprised that this is happening. I think the issue more is that I think people thought because it's an election year, even though the Fed's not an election, they're supposed to not be a political body. I think there was a wink, wink, nod, nod that people thought two cuts were coming, and the data is just not supporting it. And so then, if you're not going to get cheaper money, are you going to put it into riskier assets? So my thesis would be right now is I think that you're not really seeing it affect Bitcoin so much, but you're seeing the altcoins affected more. And so we've seen like a very stealthy sell-off in the altcoins, which is a little disappointing for the altcoin fans. But I think that's where you're really seeing it, because Bitcoin's held up nicely, and there have been some headwinds like Genesis $2 billion worth of GBTC they sold. So I think ultimately we're in a pretty good place. Yeah. It would be nice if the numbers were a little bit in our favor on the macro level.
David, I want to point out, I mentioned macroeconomics and CPI data, and just black clouds started rolling over the home headquarters here for Ron Q. But no, go ahead, continue, my friend.
So that's what I was just going to say, and that I think that I really don't think if you ask regular people, they're surprised. But I think when you amalgamate it all together, it's not what people hoped, and I think people are just acting accordingly.
Are you surprised? You and I talk about the altcoin sell-off, and I think we're both surprised by that. Are you surprised by the divergence? And the reason I bring that up is when we looked at the big upswings post the spot Bitcoin ETF, and Bitcoin was riding high, and it pulled. That rising tide lifted a lot of the tokens. What's this divergence now with the altcoins?
Well, look, we have the halving in a little over a week. You have a very easy way if you don't want to be on a crypto exchange to get access to Bitcoin, and in a way that people are used to getting access to Bitcoin. So, if you look at the totality of what's going on, it's not surprising to me. Yeah. I think that people are very curious to see what's going to happen after the halving, but I guess it's not surprising to me. But I think I was also thinking we might just see a lot of new capital come into the ecosystem.
Yeah. And we have Josh Klayman joining us. Josh, how are you? Josh may not be able to hear us yet. I'm going to put her back in the green room for now, David.
So where did you run? How do these? I don't think you're surprised by these numbers, but what's a takeaway you have?
I mean, to me, there are a couple of macroeconomic things that I'm concerned about. And I suspect you and I are old enough to remember the 70s, at least when we were young. And when you look at the kind of inflation stagnation trends, one of the things I'm concerned about is, for a long, long time, the Fed was saying inflation is transitory. This won't stick around. And then the next thing we knew, it was kind of sticking around, and then it spiked really high. And then we started this year with things are looking better. The American economy is really resilient. It's astounding. So we'll probably look at some interest rate cuts later in the year. When you look at the data saying how sticky inflation is, it makes me really concerned about the longer term macroeconomic impact. Is it not a soft landing?
Mm,
What does that do to riskier assets? Well, we look at a flight to quality. Look at gold now hitting all-time highs. What does that say? In parallel, Bitcoin's hitting all-time highs. What does that say as well? So to me, I'm a little I'm a little split about it, David. Part of me is happy some of the froth has come out of the crypto market.
mm.
Part of me is a bit unhappy that it looks like we'll be stagnating along a little bit longer, which to me is always a negative for assets like Bitcoin in the short term.
Mhm.
In the long term, I'm with you on the benefit of crypto in the far future. I know Josh is continuing to try to come in.
Yeah, so let's take that one little step further, and then we'll pivot to something else.
Go
But
for it.
I think ultimately we are going to see more capital come in. We are going to see, um, we may be seeing a Hong Kong ETF for both Bitcoin and Ether next week,
Yeah.
which would unlock some capital. And look, remember the wirehouses still aren't allowing access. I've certainly tried from a wirehouse account to buy some of the Bitcoin ETFs and had no luck with that. So and I know others have tried and expressed their displeasure about it, but I think that's a big amount of assets that have still not been unlocked. So then there's still a lot of positive catalysts that are here. I think just people are kind of hoping we're just going to be up and to the right straight away, and then we're just consolidating now.
Yeah. David, just one more thing on that point, and I think Josh is now getting off the Gulf Stream.
Ah,
She finally has an internet connection. Josh, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. I'm now on my phone. I was on my computer and it was fading in and out. So I'm on my phone and I'm happy to see you guys. I'm
Good
here
to see you.
at the Penn Club of New York for the Warden Cipher Accelerator. So
Good to have you
excited.
join us, Josh. David, I wanted to continue that thread. Josh, we're talking some macroeconomic stuff, and I want to finish off that thread a little bit with David. I think one of the other weights on this, and David, appreciate your opinion on it, is the odds of an spot ETH ETF. And I wonder, is that being a bit of a drag on the markets as well? Are you seeing it through that lens, David, or am I misreading?
well, I just think that people, if you're going to be invested in Ether, Bitcoin, and you want to be in an ETF, obviously only have one option. And I think there was a big run up because people thought we would see an ETF in May. And I think uniformly, people do not think we'll see that right away. So I think that is kind of holding down Ethereum. But, look, we have to remember there's like two political conflicts going on. There's, high inflation data. I'm not sure the jobs data, like as it's being reported, is totally accurate. And what I mean is, I think there are a lot more part time jobs that people are having. I would love to see it broken out between full-time jobs and part-time jobs,
Yeah.
reliably somewhere. So, there's not like sunshine and birds chirping all over, and things are still moving higher. So
You
I
know,
will take resiliency here.
and on that data point, really interestingly, David, I think a lot of people see the top level numbers, but you and I sometimes will parse down deeper. If you look at the job growth that they're talking about, a lot of it is in healthcare,
Yeah.
which are different variety of part-time and full-time, and it's also a lot of government employees as well. And again, great that they're getting jobs, but to me that might signal a little bit of the macroeconomic downward pressure. Is hiring in private market companies or small businesses not happening the way we'd expect in a growing economy? So lots to cover there. Josh, I know you've been jetting around, and now that you're at a venue, probably speaking and hobnobbing, I wanted to pull in one comment. When we set up the agenda, one of the things we wanted to talk about was the Terraform case, and of course, immediately as soon as I put together the agenda, we saw the Uniswap potential action or action. I would argue the Uniswap thing is probably pretty important. What was your thought, Josh, when you saw that?
So I had a lot of thoughts. I mean, one of my first thoughts was harkening back to last August when Judge Fela in the Southern District dismissed the putative class action, securities class action against Uniswap, really siding with the
Yeah.
industry in that case. And so it's very interesting I mean, I'm sure interesting might not be the word that others would choose, but I would say in that regard, it's rather surprising that the SEC would now be perhaps, you know, issuing a Wells notice and letting Uniswap know that, especially because again, we we saw the decision of Judge Phelan, which was, in my view, quite pro Uniswap. So while on one hand we may say, well, this is more of the same, or more of what we could have expected from Chair Gensler's SEC, right, and the views of DeFi in Chair Gensler's view, um, again, it surprises me in light of the fact that I thought, at least in some instance, this may have been over and done with last summer.
Mhm.
What do you
Josh,
guys
David,
think?
one of the interesting things about that, and I have this conversation with colleagues in the industry a lot. And David, you and I have talked about this a bit as well. The comment of, well, why did they wait so long? Uniswap kicked off in what was it, 2017, 2018? Is that a false narrative? Is that a false way to look at it, David? I mean, arguably the regulators are probably spending months, if not years, kind of building their cases. What did you make out of the Uniswap action?
Well, look, I don't think it's a false narrative in the sense that, look, we all know discovery takes time and these processes take time, but um, I just thought the timing was really interesting. And it was almost like they got this decision and they're like, we don't like this decision. And, I don't think they're going to appeal Judge Valia's decision, or maybe they are, and we don't know if they are or not yet. But it feels like this is just another chance to get another bite of the apple. But I have had people come to me and say, Uniswap's been operating for 5 or 6 years. Now we know ETH went from proof of work to proof of stake, but even with that, where is the harm? Where is the customer harm? And if there was a real harm, why hadn't they brought a case 2 or 3 years ago?
Yeah.
And to be frank, like, I think those are really valid questions. So
Yeah. Josh, go ahead. I know you wanted to weigh in with something else.
Yeah, I would just mention that the putative class action, obviously that Judge Phelan dismissed previously, that was not brought by a regulator, right? It was private plaintiffs,
Yeah.
just so those listening in the audience know. But some of the really interesting statements that were made in that case, Judge Phelan, if my recollection serves, had compared Uniswap to trying to hold, like, that what plaintiffs were doing in that case vis-a-vis Uniswap was like trying to hold Venmo or Zelle
Mm,
liable for, like, in the case of like a drug deal gone wrong or something using the platform. And also and she noted that third party human intervention caused the harm, not the platform. And also this I do recall definitely, um, the court, Judge Phelan's court, said that she saw merit in the defendant's counterpoint that the case was more like an effort to hold a developer of self-driving cars liable for a third party's use of the car to commit like a traffic violation or robbing a bank. And so it's really interesting. And she had said, and now I have pulled it up so I can confirm, she said, in those circumstances, one would not sue the car company for facilitating the wrongdoing. They would sue the individual who committed the wrong. And I think, um, yeah, I just think a lot of these points
hmm
they're going to be at issue.
Yeah. David, Josh, thank you for that. One of the other aspects of when I see an action like the Uniswap action makes me think of the SEC's Ethereum investigation, makes me think of Coinbase. And Uniswap is a deep pocketed organization, correct? And it's easy to kind of beat up on the SEC and Chair Gensler. They've got a job to do, and we may disagree with some of the direction that they're going in. But given their track record with these very large companies, what makes them pick a case like this? What makes them, and again, understanding the importance of the mandate that they've got, are they preparing for yet another long, drawn out legal battle?
So I think that they want to get some rulings and favorable to SEC on DeFi and the DeFi ecosystem. And Uniswap is like one of the biggest players in this
Yeah.
space. So, and they have, more jurisdiction because they clearly built in New York. Which is sort of ironic because New York is the most regulated part of the US as far as for crypto, between the BitLicense and the laws we have here. Look, I think there's continued underestimation of the strength of the crypto and fintech bar
Mm.
and these amicus briefs that are being filed. We really have a strong bar in this group, and have consistently put really high quality briefs together, high quality arguments together. And I think that, Chair Gensler isn't a lawyer, and maybe there's just some underestimation of how important that is in the process. Because the last thing I'll say, remember, litigation, you're telling a story, and
Yep.
there are facts that you base that story on, but whose story is more believable? Whose story makes more sense, and how do they interpret the law? And we have some very, very strong, practitioners in our space, and they've been advocating really well for the crypto community.
Yeah. Go ahead, Josh.
So I would echo what David said just about, and we even have seen judges applauding the amicus brief writers as well as
Yeah.
the lawyers for the parties. So I think that's absolutely true. One thing that comes to mind in terms of why now and what could be happening is we haven't really seen motion, to my knowledge, in the proposed rule change that would have expanded the definition of exchange, right? So to me, there certainly are arguments that, well, that rule change hasn't gone into place and certain things may be beyond the reach of the current rules, right? And so I wonder whether this is, as David said, trying to get some points on the board, but whether they're trying to, without passing that rule,
Right.
extend the hooks further.
And then there's one other thing. So Judge Failure, on the motion on the pleadings, dismissed the SEC's case about the Coinbase wallet and the transactions made in the wallet. So, you're bringing a case a week later after a judge dismissed on the pleadings, which is sort of, it's even a stronger dismissal than a summary judgment dismissal. So, look, there's inside baseball being played and chess and checkers and all those analogies, but the bottom line is, from what I hear from people are just sort of shaking their head and saying, look, it's been 5 or 6 years. There
Yeah.
really isn't a harm. And, bringing this now, look, is this the best use of taxpayers' money, and time and allocating resources? That's another question, you could be asking.
David, I'm going to rip up the script here, and you're probably going to kill me for it when you see me in DC next week. It's also an election year. How much of election politics plays into some of this? And again, not weighing in on one side of the political spectrum or other, but election years create weird dynamics in Washington. What do you both think about that?
All right, I got to jump in on this one, Josh. Getting out of my chair. Look, like, as you think about it, I think this is only a negative for the Democrats to be pursuing this hard line against crypto. What are you basically doing? You are, really getting a group of people, successful entrepreneurs, who are going to want to lobby, who are going to want to fund issues, and they're going to fund their issue, which is crypto. And I just don't think that, I don't know what political points are gained with the voting electorate, or, beyond a couple of certain senators we all know. I don't think this is a positive going into an election year. I sort of see it the other way. I may be in my crypto echo chamber, and Josh can, tell us what she thinks. But I don't see it as a positive. Like, what Democrats are really going to be, oh, I want to go vote for the Democratic ticket because they're taking a hard line on crypto.
Yeah.
I just don't see that.
Josh, is David wrong?
So I don't think David's wrong. I can't speak obviously for those bring suits or why they are,
Sure.
but I do recall, at the end of, I believe, former SEC Chairman Clayton's tenure at the SEC, in connection with that change of administration, the parting shot was the SEC v. Ripple case. And so
Yeah.
it does make me wonder, knowing that these cases work their way for years, right? And certainly that many have speculated or thought that some of these decisions could end up with circuit splits, could end up at the Supreme Court ultimately. It just makes me think about, frankly, the SEC v. Ripple last day of tenure.
Yeah. David, Josh, thanks very much. Good points. And thank you everyone who's watching us on LinkedIn Live and on X. If you've got questions for Josh or David or myself, please put them in the chat and we'll address them as quickly as we can. David, Josh, I'd love to pivot a little bit. One of the other things that's really catching my eye, we have a tokenization working group in the WSBA, and we focus on tokenization across a spectrum of both digital and real world assets. And David, you and I have spoken about this previously when we look at the private markets, which is now a multi-trillion-dollar market for private issuance, private credit, for example. The private markets, and some of these are ginormous firms, have begun tokenizing. What does this tell you about, you and I joke about TradFi is eating crypto. I think it's a much more nuanced conversation. But what does it say to you when you look at giant TradFi organizations that issue private securities leveraging the best benefits of blockchain?
Well, look, there's a few things. One is I think they clearly see it can be cost effective and they can wring costs out of whether it be the treasury market, whether it be certain private assets. So I think that's clearly one benefit. I think being technology forward is a second benefit and offering new products.
Yeah.
Look, the ETF providers have been wildly successful with the Bitcoin ETF, and if you can offer other services that that you think add value, it makes sense to do it. And I think BlackRock's Build fund keeps growing and it's getting positive feedback. So look, you have this illiquid market, and if there's a way to tokenize it and make it a little more liquid, not public, of course, here in the US, but
Yeah.
I think there's just a lot of opportunities. And so I think it makes sense to iterate and bring these products to market.
How much of this is, and Josh, I'd open this up for you as well. It's not necessarily a legal question, but how much of this is the generational conversation? When you look at these firms, both public companies and private organizations, when I look at, we all hear this frequently, the big generational wealth transfer. Are these firms preparing for that generational shift with boomers retiring, for example? We've joked about my niece who's never stepped foot in the bank. She's got a Robinhood account though. So, is that part of it, David and Josh? Is it the strategic long-term, here's how these businesses survive?
Look, I think anytime you can wring costs and bring efficiencies, it doesn't matter how old you are, you want to do that for your business. I do think offering products to this younger generation of wealth creators and the wealth coming down to them makes sense. And look, I think we also underestimate younger people. They're making decisions on who they want to have accounts with, what providers they want to use, what banks they want to bank with or have
Right.
wealth management accounts. Look, I think for some of them, hey, look, X bank is doing these innovative things. Like maybe that's a place where I want to be and have my business's money put to work.
Yeah.
So that's my take. What do you think, Josh? What do you think, Ron?
So I agree. I also do think it's generational. I recently attended, coincidentally, at the Pen Club as well, a talk that was like a fireside chat with former CFTC chair Giancarlo and his son. I believe his son's name is Luke, or one of his sons' names is Luke. Where they were talking about this and talking about how important it is. And one of the things that my recollection is that Giancarlo had been saying, the senior Giancarlo had been saying about when he testified before Congress, is he really talked about this generational divide. So I think this is, it's playing out in real time. Businesses want, in addition to bringing out costs, adding liquidity, things like that. I mean, in an increasingly digital world, it's important that, household names, obviously they want to remain household names. And how do you do that? You move forward with the technology and you show relevance and that you're a leader in the space.
Yeah, I tend to agree with both of you. Generational changes take a generation or more to kind of kick in. And to me, the analogy is always, and this is kind of an old joke, but I had, parents and grandparents who, now long gone, but I remember them talking about the first ATM cards and how they didn't trust it, wouldn't use it. They were just used to going to the bank and engaging the banker they saw there every time they went there. And that took a generation or two for people to get very used to it. To me, that is a very similar parallel. Some of this will be in the background of how things happen that won't really impact us on a day-to-day. We joked about, you'll know blockchains arrive when we stop saying blockchain. It's just the technology running things. But this generational change will take that time, and we'll get to a point in the not too distant future where crypto will be part of people's lives. Tokenization will be commonplace across different things. That's kind of the longer term proposition that I see. I know we all have a hard stop, so we only have got 5 minutes left or so. For everyone who's watching, thank you all so much for joining us. Josh, when the helicopter lands on the helipad on your yacht, what will you be doing and preparing for our Washington trip?
Well, immediately prior to our Washington trip, I will be in London speaking at the Digital Assets Forum. So I'll be discussing U.S. regulation of digital assets, and others will be discussing EU and UK regulation. But yeah, I'm going to be watching the news and very excited to get down to DC with you guys. By the way, may I just say one final thing about the generational divide?
Yeah, go for it.
You know, and what you were saying about blockchain will have arrived when we stop talking about it. I guess same thing with tokenization and things like that. It made me think for a minute, I used to be very nervous about buying things online a long time ago. And I remember the first thing I bought online, I'm pretty sure it was 1-800-Flowers. And I remember worrying that, what was going to happen? Like, is someone going to steal my information? And that sounds so ridiculous now, because now the payment online, I don't even think about it, right?
Yep.
It's not a matter of like, oh, the payment is the thing that's stressing me out. So yeah, I think time moves on, and I guess that dates me considerably. But
well, we've all had similar experiences, Josh, and it's a really, really good point. David, what about you, my friend?
I'm going to be doing some research. I'm going to be speaking at the Brown Rudnick blockchain conference after we go to DC. So I'll be thinking about that, and that's going to be a very lively panel. But for DC, I really want to read some of the cases, and I really want to think more about what is the longer game here, and why bring this case now, and are there things that we're not seeing or thinking? I think we've hit all the salient points, but I want to think about that some more. And I want to also think about talking points for our conversation with legislators in their offices when we're down there next week.
David, Josh, thank you so much. I likewise will be preparing. So for everyone in the audience who's watching, David and Josh and several other WSBA members will be traipsing through Washington, D.C. Monday through Wednesday of next week. Shout out to Dina Ellis and Paul Hastings for hosting us for breakfast on Wednesday, and Steve Rutenberg, Kayvon Sadeghi, Linda Lerner, so many colleagues who'll be joining us marching around. I do owe everyone a dinner. David, you and I are overdue on the steak dinner. I think I owe you from 2018. Yeah. Trying to remember that. I'm also going to spend a bit of time. I mentioned tokenization. One of the things we're very much focusing on is the background of understanding the fundamentals of tokenization. When I talk to our colleagues in TradFi, when they ask, what's my first step towards tokenizing, there's a lot of different answers, and they don't seem to understand. There's not a lot of direction in helping them. The WSBA is going to try to figure out the best way to really engage the tokenization conversation as that first step. What's the strategy for tokenization, and how do they decide what to do in that space? So that's part of the project work that we've got going on. We will leave it there. Thank you for everyone in the audience who joined us. Josh, as always, a trooper going from conference to conference. And I'm sorry, it was the Gulf Stream to London. I forgot. David, good to see you, brother. And I will see you all on Monday. Yes. For everyone in the audience, we will be back on Friday with lots to report from Washington, with lots to report from David's conference on Thursday. Thank you all for being here. We will see you again soon.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.